If I am a star, the people made me a star.
Marilyn.
Marilyn Monroe.
Like the stage here and now, fame is fickle.
Marilyn.
Marilyn Monroe.
I give you the two most exciting words in the modern dictionary. Marilyn Monroe!
This is the All Things Marilyn Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Scott Fortner, Marilyn Monroe historian, collector, and owner of the Marilyn Monroe Collection.
And I'm Elisa Jordan. I am the founder of LA Woman Tours, an author, and I am also a Marilyn Monroe historian.
Elisa, we're back.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, but we are back to talk about Marilyn. We are super excited about our guest today. It's somebody that we've been wanting to have on for quite some time, the person that I refer to as the father of the Marilyn Monroe community, and that's the one and only Greg Schreiner. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Greg, after this podcast, you will be fully informed and enlightened. And Greg is the president and one of the original founders of the Marilyn Remembered Fan Club, which is the longest fan club in existence today. The club just had its 42nd anniversary on the 5th of August. So for 42 years, this club has been going strong. And Greg is also a collector. He's a historian. He's been on countless documentaries. He's featured in countless books. He's been in this space for a very long time. And he's also just a really important person in my life. I was just looking back in my archives and I discovered that you and I first met in December of 2006. So it's
Really?
been 18 years.
I've known you all my life somehow.
It does feel that way. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott and Elisa. I'm delighted to be here. I love talking about Marilyn. What can I tell you?
And that's what we're going to
Especially
do.
with people like you that are such devotees as well. It's a joy. It's one of my fun things to do in life.
I would love for you to share with our listeners how and when you first encountered Marilyn.
This is how I remember it. When I was about 8 or 9, I lived in a small town in northern Illinois, like 2 miles from the Wisconsin border.
So this was like 20 years ago.
Yeah, something like that. Oh, if only. And I didn't have much access to the rest of the world because we live in a town of 500 people. So there was nothing around. There were no movie theaters, nothing. But the closest movie theater was 10 miles away. And get this, Monroe, Wisconsin. Is this not ironic? Monroe, Wisconsin. So there was a drive-in there, and my parents would load up the whole family. There were 5 of us, and you only have to pay once at a drive-in. You don't have to pay for everybody. It's just for the car. So we would get there, and they took me to see Some Like It Hot. And I didn't have a clue at that point who Marilyn Monroe was, but when she came on the screen, I was absolutely mesmerized. I just could not believe how beautiful she was, how talented, and this is from a little kid's standpoint. And nobody in the town I grew up in looked even vaguely like Marilyn Monroe. This was like another vision from the goddesses or something. I don't know. So anyway, in my small way, then I started collecting her. And back then, there wasn't that much to collect on her. She was still alive at this point, but magazines was about it. There weren't really no books, except the Films of Marilyn Monroe was the only book that was really published at that point. And then she died about maybe 2 years after I saw that movie. And I was devastated because I was gearing up for the day when I would finally go meet her in Hollywood. Of course, that wasn't going to happen anymore because I was determined to make it to Hollywood. I knew that I couldn't stay in this town of 500 people. So that's my first memory of Marilyn. And my very first book was The Films of Marilyn Monroe, which again was the only book really available at that time. And then I started trying to get magazines. I found a couple posters. So when I went off to college, I had Marilyn on my walls, which everybody thought I was some kind of weirdo because you just didn't do that. But I didn't care. I loved Marilyn, and that's who was on my walls. Then eventually, fate brought me out here to Los Angeles to go to school at UCLA. The rest is history.
You continue in your love for Marilyn, and then you found the Marilyn Remembered Fan Club. How did that come to be? Because now it is the longest running fan club in the world. But how did it start?
It started because once I arrived in Los Angeles, I actually lived in West LA, not too far from where Marilyn was buried. I had an apartment there where I was going to school. So I would go often over to visit Marilyn, and particularly on August the 5th. At that point, there was nothing being done for Marilyn. There hadn't been since she died. No memorial, nothing. There were a few flowers, nothing spectacular, just a few flowers from some loyal people that loved her. I went for 3 years. In 1981, I met 3 other people at the crypt at the same time, and we all were relating to the fact that we loved Marilyn Monroe, and that's why we were there. And for me, that was a revelation because nobody I knew when I grew up felt that way. So I felt like a weirdo, like I was alone in the world. And suddenly I had found 3 other people that felt exactly like I felt. And I was so thrilled. I told them we really should do something for her. It's been 20 years now since she died. And I would really love to honor her in some way. So we said, why don't we meet next year and plan a memorial for her right outside the crypt? And that's exactly what we did. In 1982, we met for the first time and had our first service. Our only guest speaker was Andre de Dienes, who somebody somehow had known, or somehow there was a connection, I don't remember anymore. He showed up and he spoke. And other than that, we just talked about how much we loved Marilyn. There were a handful of other people that came. We hadn't advertised it, but a few people were there anyway. It was so successful that we started to do it again. And we did it for, I believe, 4 years, just outside the crypt. But it got too big. It was starting, word was getting out, and it was also very hot to be standing at the crypt for that long and do a service. So at that point, I approached the cemetery and asked if there was a way we could use the chapel, and they agreed. Yeah, they said, sure, you can have our chapel. Ever since then, we've been inside the chapel. It, for me, is a thrill of a lifetime to be able to do that. And the fact that we acquired the actual eulogy of Lee Strasberg gives it another extra dimension. So it's been a grand adventure. And over the years, we have had some of the most spectacular speakers, people that were so close to Marilyn. And not only did we want to do that, but we thought, why don't we meet every month and have a meeting as well and invite people? And it was always at my house, which at that time was in West LA. And then in '84, I moved to where I am now. So then after that, it's always been at my house, except for a few times when we met at other people's homes. It just keeps growing. Once the internet hit, that's when we really could start really advertising. Our only advertisement before that point had been a magazine called Hollywood Then and Now, which came and interviewed us. And we probably gained about maybe 50 members just from that magazine coming out. And I still have that original magazine, and it shows our original members, which were about 20, all together, maybe the first time ever in a photo. And unfortunately, a lot of them are no longer with us. In fact, out of the original 4 founding members, only 2 of us still survive.
My one big regret is that I didn't find the Marilyn Remembered Fan Club sooner. There's all these years I could have been going to meetings, and I just didn't know you were there. But now we have the internet, and it's easier to find people.
Greg, why don't you list the other 3 members that helped found Marilyn Remembered?
Sure. There's Teresa Seeger and her mother, Catherine Seeger, and Anthony Cordova, who was, I don't know how old he was, but a very distinguished gentleman who, all of them really pitched in and worked hard to make the club as successful as it was. They also helped me, as well as other members. We had a chain going after a while, where I would call about 10 members, and then they would call 10 members each. And that's how we got the word out more quickly, since there was no internet at all. I know, how primitive.
But it's amazing that people came together solely for the love of Marilyn.
Totally. We did charge $2 at the door, which we eventually discontinued, but that was only because we had no budget whatsoever, and we did have expenses at the memorial, doing a program, things like that. And we had no way to reach out to charge people any other way, and most people didn't object to $2, and if it was not in their budget, we didn't care. It wasn't that big a deal. That's how it all got started. And I also had help from Jane Guy, who was the international one, and we would mail back each other. It was too expensive to call back then, so we just, through the mail, exchanged information, and eventually she came over here and spoke at a memorial finally.
She was in Australia, correct?
Yes. It was just she and I. That was it. We were first, and then I think maybe 3 or 4 years into it, I don't remember exactly which year, in the 80s, she formed her club, and we were the only 2 for quite a long time. Then, when the internet started happening, is when other clubs started forming all over the world, because suddenly you could reach out to people. And then we had clubs in France and England and Germany and Australia, obviously Russia now too, lots of places. Most of them did not survive. That's continued to keep going. I'm very proud of us for having done that. We did make the decision early on not to do a newsletter because we felt that would be the one reason we would not continue, because putting that together is so much work.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact we wanted to be more of a live meeting club rather than a newsletter that you send out to people all over the world. So initially our thought was only to be a local club, reaching out to those who could drive to the meetings and attend them. And we did have a meeting every month up until about maybe 2000. That's quite a long time. That's a lot of meetings.
It must have helped to have been in Los Angeles.
Oh, totally. I think that was the point, that we had access to the fact this is where she died and where she was born. Her home was here most of the time. And most of the people that knew her lived in Los Angeles. We had access, surprisingly, to so many people that were in her life. And that, for me, was really exciting, to suddenly get to meet Whitey Snyder or Jim Daugherty or all the people that we got to know over the years that were people that were close to her.
Greg, I want to do a little exercise. The list of guest speakers at the Marilyn Remembered meetings and then also the memorial service is really mind-blowing. It's people that were really important to Marilyn and people that were really close to Marilyn and people that you've encountered over the last how many decades of leading the fan club and being a Marilyn fan. Elisa and I are going to read off some names, and what we'd like for you to do is just give your first one-word response or reaction when you hear the name.
One word?
One word. And then just talk a little bit about that person and what they were like so that people that are listening can get an idea of what they were like. I'm going to go first. One-word response, and then feel free to explain a little bit further.
Okay.
Jane Russell.
Delicious. She was such fun. I had 3 occasions to get to know her. And each time I loved talking with her. She was so down to earth, and I love that about her. Particularly, we were at Grauman's Chinese for the unveiling of Marilyn's stamp, and we were backstage talking before we went on. And she couldn't have been nicer, more down to earth, and her memories of Marilyn were so exactly what I expected, that she was someone that she just adored, and that they really got along so well. I think we all know that already, but she verified that for me.
At the stamp event where Marilyn Monroe's stamp was released, wasn't there a rather interesting comment that was made by Tony Curtis?
Yes, but that was a different stamp event. That one was down at the Hotel del Coronado.
Oh.
For that one, Jane wasn't there. That one was
Okay.
Eli Wallach and Tony Curtis and me. And when Tony got up, and I don't mind saying this because it is true, I was there, he was so not professional. He was crude. His closing comment was, now that we have a stamp, every man in America can lick her. And I thought, this is just so gross and disgusting.
Yeah.
I wish he had been classier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that sort of was him. I think he was just that kind of guy.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Eli Wallach, he is also on our list. So what is your one word to describe him? And then talk a little bit about him.
Distinguished. I really liked him. He spoke beautifully and very intelligently about Marilyn, and I got the feeling there was a love there, and maybe even more than just a friendship love at one point that they did experience. He was really fond of her.
And of course, he was Marilyn's co-star in The Misfits, for people who may not know.
Classmate at the Actors Studio.
And I think he dated her for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Next up, Don Murray from Bus Stop.
Delightful. Don was a kick. I really loved meeting him. I met him twice. He was just the nicest guy, real down to earth also. His only reason he didn't come speak at a memorial was that August 5th was the day of his wedding anniversary. So every August 5th, he was committed to his wife, and he lived in Santa Barbara. So he said, I can't leave my wife on August the 5th. That's why we never got him, but he would have done it otherwise, because he really appreciated Marilyn and owed the beginning of his career to her, actually, because that was his first real movie.
And he got the Oscar nomination for Bus Stop, and Marilyn was passed over.
Yeah, ironically, yeah.
Jim Doherty, husband number 1.
Fun. He was just the nicest guy. He told so many lovely stories about their early marriage and how Marilyn was just so young and immature in many ways and really learning how to be a housewife. She hadn't a clue. She was only 17 at the time.
Well, she was 16 when she got married.
16, right. By the time they moved to where she was keeping house, I think on Catalina, she was 17. And so she was learning everything. And he told the story about the peas and the carrots, which you probably know, which is a
She
great
liked the
story.
colors.
And how she brought a cow into the house when it was raining out because she was afraid the cow was going to get ill or something from being out in the rain. Wonderfully naive things like that. There was a real, genuine, I think, affection. I felt no animosity towards Marilyn at all, even though they divorced. I think they both came to realize that their lives were going in different directions. And Jim went on to be very successful in what he did as a policeman in Los Angeles. He was no slouch. But I just think that he and Marilyn realized that as much as they may have loved each other, they really were not right for each other in the long run. And he released her without any struggle. He didn't fight it. And they moved in different directions.
He always came across to me as just a really nice, genuine guy.
And he was. He was totally as nice as you could ask for anybody. You'd want to be married to him because he was so nice. He down to earth. The thing he said is that he had all these letters from Marilyn, and he said his wife was so jealous of Marilyn that he had to burn them all.
Oh.
She just really didn't want anything of Marilyn in the house at all. And I find that very sad that he ended up marrying somebody that felt that way. Instead of just saying, I embrace the fact you had this lovely movie star in your life and now you've got me. But she didn't feel that way. Unfortunately, a lot of letters went down the drain that we could have today.
Can I just touch on the fact that going back to Marilyn learning how to keep house and that kind of thing, not only was she very young, it's not like she had a lot of examples moving around. It's not like she had never lived with a woman who took care of her, but it wasn't consistent. So she didn't have a lot of consistency in her life, moving from foster home to foster home and spending time in an orphanage. So she was probably lacking in the cooking skills, as we know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Her life was never a stable one. Foster homes are not a stable way to live because you never know when you're going to have to leave that home. So I give her a lot of credit for being as successful as she was, considering what she was up against. And I think she tried really hard to be successful, but she also, probably because of her experience at Radio Plain with David Conover, that opened her mind to thinking, maybe I can really do something more with my life. That, I think, is when she decided that she was going to go for it.
Yeah.
And,
So really quick, David Conover is the gentleman who came in and photographed pretty young ladies working at Radio Plain. It was the Rosie the Riveter era. And it was decided that it might cheer up the brave boys on the front to see these pretty girls working these industrial jobs that they had to leave behind to go to war. Marilyn was obviously selected because she was a pretty young girl. And he told her, hey, you're cute. You should try this professionally. And that was pretty much all she needed to hear.
Yeah. And then she got really serious and eventually went to the Blue Book modeling agency to really learn how to be good at what she wanted to do. I think innately she had it in her already, but I guess she felt insecure and wanted to really get some ideas. And I suspect she did learn some good things at the Blue Book, things that took her through the rest of her career, how to move and how to be in front of a camera and things like that. She was determined and she made it happen.
Police officer Jack Clemens. And this is the first officer on the scene who said that Marilyn's maid, Eunice Murray, was doing laundry when he arrived at 4:45 a.m. He also claimed that Marilyn's room was very tidy when he arrived. And of course, photos show exactly the opposite.
Yes, he was at a meeting. He was not believable.
Hyphenated
That's
word.
multiple
Okay.
words, but we're going to let it slide.
We'll hyphenate those.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
He told a good story, but I think he wanted attention. I think he enjoyed being the one that was first on the scene, and he made up this whole story scenario, which then led into sort of the whole theory of her being murdered. He was a nice guy, and I think he enjoyed us inviting him, and he loved sharing it all. But there was just a little something about him, like a couple of other speakers we've had at the meetings, that you just didn't really buy what they were saying. It just didn't feel like it was true.
There is pretty solid evidence that Marilyn didn't even own a washer and dryer. So we know that she didn't own a washer and dryer. There are receipts that she sent her laundry out to be done. There's that.
Yeah.
Was there something about the way he spoke or his demeanor, or what was it that made you not believe him?
It felt a little bit like he was trying to gain attention and exploitation by what he was saying. I think he was making himself more important than he was, because my understanding was that he was not there that long, that other people arrived and he was taken away and that was it. And he made it sound like he was really there for all of it. And
Like the lead investigator,
yeah,
that
I
type of thing. Mhm.
personally didn't buy it.
You're correct. Police records indicate that he was the first person on the scene. However, investigators who were more qualified soon arrived and took his place. So he basically got there and was the first person to arrive, and that's about it. He was not an investigator. The investigators arrived shortly thereafter, and that ended Jack Clemens' need to be on the scene.
Sometimes people love to exaggerate their experience with Marilyn into much more than maybe it was. Many times there were
And that's so common.
other people I could name that
Mhm.
spoke at our meetings that did the same thing.
The next person on our list is Sidney Juleroff, who was a hairdresser at MGM. He's the man who did Marilyn's hair for the Asphalt Jungle, and he convinced her to cut off her long hair and go shorter for the Marilyn look we now know. So how would you describe him?
Amazing. When he came, and he actually came to several meetings because he really liked us. He was one of several people that kept coming back because he really enjoyed being around us. And I was in awe of him because I remember his name on so many MGM movies. He's almost credited for every movie from the 1930s onward as the hairdresser. So he worked with Greta Garbo all the way up to Marilyn and then beyond. He really was in there. He knew everybody. I liked him a lot. He was retired at that point, and I think he was longing for a little attention, and we gave it to him because we all thought he was so special. And he was very elegant and dignified, tall and thin and very statuesque, wonderful. And he spoke beautifully about Marilyn. And of course, he eventually wrote a book. But there probably was a little exaggeration there. I think when I read the book, I go, wait a minute. Even you called her the night she died? Everybody suddenly. Because he hadn't mentioned that. But overall, he said nothing negative about Marilyn. He came to 3 meetings at least. So I liked him a lot. Ironically, I asked him if he had anything of Marilyn's that she'd given him, and he said, no, regrettably, I don't have a thing of Marilyn's, but I wish I did.
Greg, let's talk about why that's important, what you just said, why that's very important today.
There is at least one person on eBay that's selling hundreds of things, and of course nothing is ever pictured with Marilyn wearing it. A lot of red flags. I don't know exactly how that came about. Sidney did have a young man living with him. He called him his son, but it wasn't his son. And I'm thinking maybe after Sidney died, he took advantage of that and made up all this, or someone much later after the fact is going out and buying stuff and claiming it's Marilyn's.
So to be clear, there are countless certificates of authentication, letters of authentication that are signed by Sidney, allegedly, even notarized, that are being used to validate and justify that an item that's being sold, in this case, many on eBay, are actual Marilyn Monroe owned items. And what's really important here, the message is that Greg actually asked Sidney, did Marilyn ever give you anything?
Unless he lied to me, which I don't believe he did. He had no reason to lie to me. I don't know why he would. And of course, my opinion is that a COA doesn't mean anything. If you don't have a picture, I'd be really nervous for any COA coming from a dead person, particularly,
Right.
where you can't verify it. Signatures can be forged.
Exactly.
And certainly a red flag is raised when you suddenly have hundreds and hundreds of items that have no physical proof. No
Right.
photos, nothing. That should be a major red flag for anyone.
And there are so many photos out there of many of the items that Marilyn owned and wore.
Marilyn was photographed so much. Anything she wore or owned pretty much got seen because Marilyn didn't own a lot. She wore the same things over and over, and her closet was not nearly as big, I don't think, as most stars. She didn't buy that much. A lot more has been sold by these people than I think was at the 99 auction, which makes you wonder.
Sure does. I've got the next name, Greg,
Yeah.
and it's photographer George Barris.
Great. He was just great. He loved Marilyn. He was one of our most faithful members. He came to everything, all the meetings, to the memorial, to the birthday party. He loved sharing about Marilyn. And I really do believe he really cared for her. I think that he was definitely enamored of her. And he was there. I mean, he was there at her last birthday party. He was there on the beach with her. I go, wow, you lucky man. And they were in correspondence. He was going to be writing a book with her about her life. So many things that might have happened. And I liked him as a person.
He definitely loved to talk about Marilyn, as is
Yeah,
evidenced at
couldn't
memorial
stop him.
services. You couldn't stop him, right?
But that's okay. There's
Yeah.
just something wonderful about that his heart was so full of Marilyn. I love that about him.
The next name is Billy Trevia, who went by Trevia professionally.
Yeah.
He was a costume designer for 20th Century Fox and designed some of Marilyn's most famous looks, including the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend dress and the famous white halter dress that she wears in The 7-Year Itch.
Classy. That's the word for him. He came in and he was so elegant, so suave, so sophisticated. He just shared about how much fun it was to work with Marilyn and how much he loved designing. They made each other famous because he designed things that really is the Marilyn look we think of the most. She made him famous by wearing the things and making them as famous as they were. So their careers both took off at the same time because of each other. And he was a nice guy. I can see why Marilyn enjoyed going out with him after hours, because he was just a fun, sexy guy, very good looking, very much a ladies' man. I'm not saying he did anything with Marilyn, but I think he just loved women very much. I think you can see it in the way he designs the clothing. He makes
Absolutely.
it so glamorous.
She looked
so
great.
beautiful. Yeah.
You have to love women to dress them that beautifully. He wanted those women to look beautiful.
He loved women in the sense that he wanted to make them as beautiful as he could. And he really did that. He was very creative. And he was also an incredible artist. If you look at his sketches, they're really the best sketches of almost any designer. They're like works of art. They're so beautifully done. Very talented guy.
We'll talk about your collection in a minute, Greg, but you actually own some original Trevia costumes that Marilyn wore in her films. I think one of the most important ones is the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend original costume. Why don't you talk about that for our listeners?
Not the big one, but the original.
The original.
I have what survived of it. I don't have the whole costume anymore because it was taken apart, the top part of it, and I think probably used for other stuff. I believe Sherry North wore some of it in another movie.
She did.
It's mostly rhinestones. And they're pretty expensive. That studio didn't care. Once they realized they weren't going to use it, they thought, let's use it for something else instead. But they did save the bottom part and the fan. So I do have that much of it anyway. It's fun to have something that didn't make it in the film, but really it's the most famous number in the film. Maybe her most famous number of all of the things she ever did.
And even though it wasn't seen in the film, she's still pictured wearing it.
Yeah, thank God they did the costume test for it at least. I guess it never got as far as being utilized in the movie and filmed.
Yeah, Greg, so for the listeners who may not know, why don't you share why the costume that you own, which is the original costume for Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, why wasn't that costume used?
And the calendars, I think, what killed it, because they wanted to distance Marilyn from anything like that. I think the number would have been a different kind of number. It would have been sexier, more fun in a way, maybe, with all the rhinestones and being covered in diamonds and singing about how you love diamonds. They still put some on her, bracelets and things, but it's not quite the same as being covered entirely in supposedly diamonds. Too bad they didn't film that version too. I would have loved to have seen how they were going to do it that way.
Bebe Goddard, Marilyn's foster sister.
Sweet. Bebe was a really loyal member, really loyal. She came to every meeting. She loved talking about her days with Marilyn, which were a few. She did live with Marilyn for a while as a child. And she was very likable, and she spoke every year at the memorial. She was troubled and poor. She had very little money. And I think that's where we come into a problem with Bebe, because she was approached by someone who remained nameless that offered her a way to make money by selling things with her name attached to them. And unfortunately, she agreed to it. That's where we have a little difficulty with Bebe now. But during the time that basically she was alive, this didn't happen until after she died. And I inherited some of Bebe's estate, which included the paperwork showing all the stuff with this other person and a list on how to make it look more like Marilyn by putting Chanel No. 5 on it.
So to clarify, there was a dealer that would go out and buy pieces from thrift stores or wherever, and then Bebe would write up a letter of authenticity saying that Marilyn had given her that. Yeah.
And you have the proof that those are indeed fakes.
I have on a piece of paper, yes. And it's pretty obvious too. Again, it's like the stuff we're seeing today. No photo evidence of any of it. At least the BB is not forged, her name, but she's not telling the truth, unfortunately. BB had very little. She did have a few things that she did sell at auction that were authentic. And then she did have that footage that I inherited of her wearing the fur coat. And so I know that came from her mom, Grace Goddard.
And that's pretty amazing footage. Marilyn is
It
just
is,
modeling
it
this
is.
fur coat out
Yes.
on
Yeah,
the sidewalk.
And it's not just that. You don't usually see the whole footage, but there's also photos of Grace arriving by a train, and there's other stuff besides Marilyn.
The next name is Sylvia Barnhart. She's the woman credited with taking Norma Jean's brunette, naturally curly hair to the platinum blonde we now know her for.
Yep.
For the very first time.
For
For the first time.
Sassy woman. I liked her a lot. She was also very loyal, came to almost every meeting. She was into butterflies, so she always wore butterfly pins all over, which I thought was fun. I don't think she knew Marilyn that well, but the fact that she did do her hair and at Frank and Joseph's and really did make her into the blonde we know today, gave her that fame, and she reveled in it. She loved being known for that. She was a simple hairdresser, but suddenly she was famous for the Marilyn Monroe connection.
And they are pictured together.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is a picture of them together. And they both look beautiful, by the way. She looks pretty sharp too. And I liked her a lot. And she was a kick. And she came up until when she couldn't come anymore.
I got to meet Sylvia several times. She was around when I started coming to meetings, and I would agree with your assessment. She's very sassy. Yeah. I've got the next name, Greg, and it's John Miner. And for those listening who may not know, John Miner was a LA County prosecutor who many years after the fact said that he had access to tapes of interviews that Marilyn had made with her psychoanalyst, Ralph Greenson. And of course, there's no evidence that those tapes actually exist.
He also said he was at Marilyn's autopsy, and there's no evidence he was in attendance there either.
My word for him would be doubtful. I always took what he said with a grain of salt. He was not a nasty person. Seemed like a nice guy. He seemed to me like someone who really wanted to make himself into something more than what he was. He may have been associated with the coroner's office, but I wonder if he really was at the autopsy. The tapes, again, there was never a shred of proof that he had them or had heard them even. I think he at least said he heard them.
But even the Greenson family says there's no evidence of tapes.
Again, and he's gone, so we can't quiz him anymore. In his defense, though, he never said anything negative about Marilyn to me. He always seemed very confirming about Marilyn and very complimentary. So I liked him that way. I just didn't believe him.
So we're going to end on a positive note, and Elisa has the last name.
Susan Strasberg.
Yay! Lovely. That's the word for her. Lovely. She was a wonderful lady. She was famous, and she didn't have to come and do what she did every year. But when she was alive, every year, she would come and read her father's eulogy. And she always got very emotional when she read it. And I have some wonderful footage of her reading it. She really came out and supported. And I really sensed that she loved Marilyn and thought of her like a sister. And of course, she even wrote the book about that experience.
I think our listeners probably learned a lot about all of these people that were in Marilyn's inner circle one way or another, either people that she knew personally or people that were associated after she had passed away. You've been able to give firsthand knowledge and experience on those individuals.
I'm delighted to. And I still, all the time, get calls from people from all over the world that they say, we're in Los Angeles. Can we come by and see your collection? I'm delighted to show them. I love the fact that they care that much, and they usually get pretty emotional.
After this podcast, you're probably going to get a lot more calls.
We might need to cut that out, actually.
We might need to cut that out.
Yeah.
Well,
let's leave that
they can
out.
go to my website and also see my collection that way too.
Greg, we want to talk a little bit about the memorial service now. This has been a huge part of the fan club. Regular meetings, we've done fundraising over the years for Holly Grove and other types of entities, but it really is the memorial service that Marilyn Remembered is most known for. Before we move into that topic, I wanted to let you know that on Monday this week, which was August 5th, and that was the 62nd anniversary Marilyn Monroe Memorial, Elisa and I interviewed some attendees. And so we want to play for you our interviews of memorial service attendees and then just give you a chance to share some
What a
feedback.
lovely thing. That's lovely. Yay.
Here we go. I'm here with Susan Hale of Parisian Florist, and it is August 5th, 2024, and Susan has just delivered flowers for Marilyn's memorial. So Susan, thanks for taking the time to chat with All Things Marilyn today. So I'm curious, how did your family and you come to be in the floral business and acquire Parisian Florist?
My father has always been a florist. His parents used to go down to the docks when the Catalina boat would come in, and all the boys would buy corsages for their girlfriends on the way to Catalina. So he's always been in the flower business. My uncle and my dad bought it 1960.
Your family owned the flower shop prior to Marilyn's funeral and, of course, got to do all of the flowers for Marilyn Monroe's funeral.
Right. Yes, we did.
Talk to me about what it's like to be, in a way, the official Marilyn Monroe florist, because I come to you every year for Marilyn's birthday and for my memorial spray for Marilyn Remembered does, and many other fans do too. So what's that mean to you?
It's an honor, first of all, to be able to do something and be a part of such a beautiful, wonderful lady and icon and Hollywood history. I went to Hollywood High School, so Hollywood is my town.
So just like Marilyn, you're a hometown girl.
Yeah.
I understand you have some Joe DiMaggio memorabilia there in the shop. Tell our listeners what you have.
We have a signed baseball and a few other items.
You were mentioning earlier that Joe brought that in personally. Tell us about that.
Yes, he finally came in and we met him in person. A friend of my father's brought him in many years after even he had stopped sending flowers, but it was wonderful to finally meet him.
What an amazing experience.
It was.
Do you remember exactly how many years Joe DiMaggio bought flowers for Marilyn?
20 years.
20 years. 3 times a week for 20 years.
3 times a week, 20 years.
Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with All Things Marilyn today.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And appreciate all you fans. It was wonderful. Keep it going.
Thank you.
What is your name and what brings you here?
My name is Julio. I'm here to connect with the people I've met through the journey of discovering Marilyn.
How did you become a Marilyn fan?
Feels like a long time ago. I used to work on a street team for a wax museum, and I was outside with a wax figure of Marilyn Monroe, and I didn't really know anything about her, and people would ask questions about her, so I decided to learn about her and watch her movies, and I just instantly became hooked, and that's where it really started.
How did you progress? How did you get from there to here?
I started to meet people on Hollywood Boulevard who invited me to events. I was able to meet people from all over the world and even locally. These are people I'm still friends with today.
How many memorials have you been to? Do you know?
I've been coming to the memorials for almost 15 years. I can't believe it. It's really been a great event to be in attendance of.
What is your favorite thing about Marilyn?
My favorite thing about Marilyn was something that really inspires me is to really go for what you want. Artistically, creatively, she always inspired me. What was in my imagination and in my dreams and make it a reality no matter what.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
With me now is actress Elisa Soper. Alicia played the part of Marilyn Monroe in the play by Luke Yankee that was titled Marilyn, Mom and Me. And Luke Yankee is the son of Eileen Heckert, who co-starred with Marilyn in Bus Stop. Thank you for taking a few minutes to chat with me.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me.
We're here at the memorial, and this is your very first memorial, and you're speaking today as part of the service. Tell our listeners what it was like to play Marilyn. What did that mean to you, and how did you prepare?
Oh, it's honestly been probably about 10 years of preparation.
Wow.
Half of that was accidental. The other half was from the time that I started working on the play, readings and whatnot. There was a lot of preparation specifically for that play. There's a lot of vocal and dialect work with the different voices going in and out of the bus stop accent. When she's presenting to the press, also then when she's dropping more of the facade and trying to connect one-on-one. It was honestly just such a dream come true to get to play such a multifaceted, varied version of Marilyn.
I saw the play, and I remember when you came out of the accent that Marilyn portrayed in the film, and you did it's not even accurate to say the real Marilyn voice, but you did the Marilyn voice minus the accent, where in that portion of the play, you were talking to the press, and boy, you nailed it. I think that had somebody been sitting there with their eyes closed, they would have thought that they were actually listening to Marilyn. I just wanted to say, really nice job on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell our listeners what Marilyn means to you.
She's helped me pay my rent for many years now. So I owe her quite a lot. She's an inspiration. She's a challenge. I admire her so much and I respect her so much as an actress, as a woman, as a human being. I just think she's remarkable.
You've portrayed Marilyn in various ways over the years?
I have, yes. I started just as my day job at Universal Studios. I'm still there. And then through friends seeing pictures and things in the industry, doors ended up opening that I didn't necessarily mean to pursue, but I'm very grateful they did. And yeah, so I've gotten to play her on a handful of TV shows and some independent film and other stage productions as well. I've gone on quite a journey with her and very grateful.
And I know that you have an online presence. How can our listeners see you and follow you online?
I'm on Instagram at ACSOPER.
Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you so much. What is your name?
My name is Jeff Sumners. I'm originally from Redondo Beach, but I was born in West LA. I was a law enforcement officer for about 30 years, and now I work as a train engineer at Knott's Berry Farm.
So you're a local boy.
Yes, I am. I actually was living in Venice at the time of Marilyn's death, about 3 miles away the day she died.
When did you become a Marilyn fan?
Probably as a teenager, the first movie I remember watching was Some Like It Hot. I thought, wow, this is really cool. Black and white was neat back in the 60s and stuff when I was watching TV. And a lot of it was going color, but I thought it was very retro. I just loved it. And her acting in that was superb. And her timing as a comedian was just wonderful.
So this is your first memorial. What brings you here today?
This is my first memorial, but I come to the cemetery about every other week. Bring her flowers, talk to her about my life, what's going on, talk to her about what's going on with her house. It's something I will definitely attend in the future. I loved to celebrate her birthday here too as well. And the last one you guys just had at the Hollywood Garage Museum was a wonderful thing too. That's something I just love to do. And I love her and I love her films and I feel like I'm her night protector now. It's just...
You've been a fan for a long time. What is it that keeps you interested in her?
It's sad that no one was able to help her, whatever happened that night. I feel that all she wanted in her life was love and people to understand her. I wish there were more people like I see myself and all these other people here at this event, just showering love and admiration, and wish she had more people like this in her life.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Pleasure talking to you.
I'm standing here with Roy from New York City. And Roy, I know that you have been coming to memorials as long as I can remember. I've seen you at every memorial for years. So talk with us about how many years you've been coming to Marilyn memorials and why.
So many I forget. I know I was here before the 25th anniversary. And I'm coming every year since. Only the pandemic, we didn't come for 2 years, but I've been coming every year consecutive for over 50 years.
That's amazing. For our listeners, Roy just shared with me that he's 89 years old.
That's right. Marilyn, everybody loves Marilyn. And then people you meet here when you get here, friends and things. But I enjoyed coming here because she was some beautiful star. Very nice.
So you, of course, were alive when Marilyn was alive. Did you ever see her in person?
I never seen her in person. On TV, movies, but never in person.
Talk with us about what it was like when you were alive and her celebrity. How big of a star was she then as compared to today?
Oh, she was a big star then, but even today, after she's gone, she's a bigger star, in my opinion. Because everybody loved Marilyn Monroe. Very big star.
That's so true. Why do you think that is? What do you think is her staying power?
I guess the personality and the looks and everything, and the fame, everything about her was good.
Yeah.
Everybody never said a bad word about Marilyn Monroe. She was just great.
Yeah.
And she lives on forever.
She sure does. I always refer to her as our modern day Cleopatra.
You got it right. Yeah, I agree with that. 100%.
Thank you for taking the time, Roy.
But thank you. Bye-bye.
So, Greg, that's just a cross-section of people that were there that day.
It does my heart good because I always worry every year, is anybody going to show up? And I forget how this service means a lot to so many people. And I'm very proud of that we were able to do it for 42 years now, because obviously it's really meant a lot to people and it does my heart good.
You've brought so many people together from all over the world for the memorial.
Indirectly, I think Marilyn's the one that did that part. I just set it up and then Marilyn gets them to come. But
Yeah, but without your leadership in your organization every single year,
well,
there would really be no centralized
well,
ceremony.
I'm glad I had the gumption and the intelligence to do it back in '81 and
Mhm.
say, let's do something for Marilyn Monroe. Because
Yeah.
I wanted to. I really wanted to do more for her. And I thought this was a great way to do it. And I guess I was right.
We've touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit about your favorite speakers and who you would pick and why they are special?
Okay. 42 years of speakers. It's a lot of speakers. And some of them were obviously duplicates. They spoke many years. At the beginning, particularly, we were so lucky that almost everybody that spoke was someone who knew Marilyn. And out of those, I would say Evelyn Moriarty was one of my favorites, just because there was such a deep connection, I think, between her and Marilyn. George Barris, we mentioned already, is someone who really loved her very much. Bibi Goddard, in her own way, I think. Gene Allen spoke. He was the artistic director on her last movie. So he was right there at the end, and he was very poignant what he had to say. I love everybody, because everybody seems to bring something to the table. And some are, of course, incredible speakers, like we had Jane Guy this time. Jane always somehow comes up with the most delicious stories, and you never get tired of them. Luke Yankee is a wonderful speaker. Elisa Jordan is a wonderful speaker.
What about Nancy Bolander?
Nancy Bolander was a very lovely lady. She was another foster child that lived with Marilyn, like Bibi Goddard, only earlier. She doesn't have a lot to say because she was so young at the time, but she's one of those people that you know that she's just a good person. And I totally forgot about inviting her this year. I don't know that she would have made it because she's getting up in years now, but I always loved hearing from her because she had such lovely memories of Marilyn and dispelled a myth that I think people have about her growing up in a bad situation, because particularly with the Bolanders, they really were good people, I think, and they treated her pretty well, but they were not able to adopt her, even though they wanted to. That might have made a whole difference in her life. Maybe she wouldn't have been Marilyn Monroe, but she might have been happier. I don't know.
That's what I love about Nancy when she has been at the memorial service, because she has been, as you just said, able to dispel some of these rumors. Marilyn had a horrible childhood. She was never happy. It was terrible foster home after terrible foster home. And Nancy was able to say, well, in my experience, it wasn't terrible.
No, Jane brought up the whole point about Marilyn's home looks so grim in the photos, but it wasn't grim. It was a beautiful home, a warm, inviting home. And Marilyn was making it extra super beautiful with her tiles and all of her furniture and everything she was adding to it. It would have been a very joyful, I think, comforting home for her.
Greg, I do want to say thank you on behalf of not just myself, but everybody, all of the fans, the entire club, everybody who's able to come to the memorial service, because those of us who grow up just having this connection with Marilyn and not recognizing that there's an opportunity to actually be that close to her in a way that is so special is really just because of you and the way that you've been able to do this for so long. And I'm honored just to be part of the service every year. It's an awful lot of work. It's also
rise to the challenge.
But it still just boggles my mind to think that the service is being held in the same chapel where Marilyn's funeral was held, and she's just feet away. We're just so fortunate there are fans around the world who probably will never get the opportunity to experience that.
But how lucky they can, at least through the wonder of the internet now, be there with us. I just remember growing up in a isolated area, not knowing anyone that I could talk to about this. And it's so painful almost to not be able to share something that you feel so deeply about with anyone without having to look at you like you're nuts or something. And so thank God that we were able to reach now because obviously a lot of people out there that love Marilyn, and this is their opportunity to share that love on that very special day. And no matter what else, as long as I'm alive and can do it, there will be a memorial service for Marilyn, because I think that's, as you mentioned, our number one focus above everything else.
I just want to thank you, Greg, because when I discovered that there was a memorial many years ago, and I went to see what it would be like, and it was such a beautiful expression of people who are coming together in a very wholesome but very loving way to express a gratitude to someone who means a lot to us. And it's not something that a lot of people get, because none of us knew Marilyn personally, but she means so much to us. And to find other people who feel the same way It's really special and almost kind of a relief. And then I found that there was a whole club behind this memorial, and I could talk to other fans and other people, and it's brought me to both of you and to a whole group of people who have become some of my best friends that are not just Marilyn fans, but genuinely good people who I've really grown to almost make a second family. We have our real family, our biological family, and then we create families as we go through life. And this is definitely one of the families I've created, because I just can't imagine my life without these people now.
That's exactly how I feel. And I'm so lucky to have met so many incredible people through Marilyn over the years. 42 years of meeting incredible people. And it's my family too now, and I love it. And my home is like Marilyn in a way, because there's so much Marilyn in my home. I just feel like her spirit is there a bit for me, maybe. I don't know.
Well, let's talk about what's there. We can switch gears now and talk about your collection. And so another aspect of Greg Schreiner's life is that he's also a huge Marilyn Monroe collector. Why don't you talk a little bit about your collection, share with our listeners what you have, and what are some of your favorite items?
Number one on my list are my costumes of Marilyn, my clothing items, because I just feel like they're such a personal part of her life. And she touched them, obviously. And my very first thing I ever owned of Marilyn's was a gown, a red gown with a purple sash that she wore to the premiere of Monkey Business. And that was the very first thing I ever owned. My second costume was the silver lame dress from Gentlemen for Blondes that is not in the movie, but was made for the movie. And
she wore that to the Photo Play Awards, so she's photographed wearing
also
that.
to an event with Jack Benny at the Shrine.
The Shrine.
Yeah, on my birthday, by the way. Then probably some of the other costumes I have, Let's Make Love, I have Prince and the Showgirl, I've got Ticket to Tomahawk, I have some personal clothing, I have several other pieces, and then I have furniture. I have her bedroom dresser that was next to her bed where she died. I have her china cabinet. I have a painting that hung in her home. I have her sofa, and I have a refrigerator that she had her last meal out of. Things like that. It just, luck is how I got a lot of it, frankly.
Tell our listeners how you got the refrigerator. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. I was reading the LA Times, and just for some reason my eye went to the one hand section, and there it said, Marilyn Monroe's refrigerator for sale. I thought, aha, sure. This was probably back in the 1990 or something like that. And I didn't believe it for a minute, but I thought, I'll go out and look, because I don't think they realized I had photos from Eunice Murray showing the refrigerator, so I knew what it looked like. And sure enough, when I got there, that was the refrigerator. It was the real deal.
And what was the distinguishing aspect of the refrigerator that you knew?
The most distinguishing aspect is that Marilyn had purchased it as an all silver or chrome refrigerator, and then painted the sides blue to match the blue tile of her kitchen that she'd put in. That was such a cool thing. And there it was with the blue on both sides. There's no way it could not be her refrigerator when you see all of that. And the people just wanted to get rid of it. It didn't work anymore. And so I didn't pay a lot of money for it. And things weren't going for a lot back then anyway. But how ironic that I, of all the people, the millions of people in Los Angeles, would be the one that see that ad and want Marilyn Monroe's refrigerator. How lucky. It's like, how perfect, right? And then the Nunez family sold a lot of the furniture, and they came to me first. And they were active members of the club too. Mrs. Nunez came to meetings. And so they offered me some of the furniture. And wow, what a miracle.
The Nunez family, for those who might not be familiar, they purchased Marilyn's home after she passed away. And because the furniture was brand new, they kept a lot of the furniture.
It was offered to them by the Strasbergs at a very reduced price.
Yeah, and then they sold it off later.
Yeah.
I don't know, Greg, you got a pretty amazing collection. You've got film scripts, and you've got documents and signed checks. You have the original signed agreement that dissolves Marilyn's relationship with Milton Green as part of Marilyn Monroe Productions.
No, I've been lucky. And I credit it to Marilyn. I think somehow she's made it happen for me, that this whole thing has happened. And the people we've met, the club being this successful, somehow she's got to have a part in it. I hope that she's happy with what we're doing.
I think she'll be happier when you give that accessory that goes with one of my pieces to me.
Like the muff that goes with my silver dress? Is that the idea?
I think it's the other way around.
Oh, touche.
I think it's the other way around. Yeah.
Well, We should ask Elisa which way she thinks it should go, the dress with the muff or the muff with the dress.
Yeah. And so I think in this
you guys
case,
should have shared custody.
We do. We share our collection and exhibit it. So they get back together occasionally.
so
That's nice.
just to clarify for our listeners, the event that Marilyn attended wearing the silver lame dress, the charity event in 1953 at the Schreiner Auditorium, she's wearing her white fox fur muff and then also her white fox fur stole. And I actually happen to own the muff. And so for years, Greg and I have given each other a hard time about who should get what based on which particular item we have that goes with another item in each other's collection. So it's a running joke for quite some time now.
Can you tell our listeners what else you collect?
I can. Not only do I collect Marilyn, but because of Marilyn, I collect other things. My initial thing was just to collect Marilyn, but I fell in love with costumes when I started collecting Marilyn, and she started becoming not affordable anymore. So I branched out and started collecting other costumes, and I now have over 500 of all the great stars of Hollywood, and that's where my show came up. I invented a show with singers and dancers wearing the clothes and recreating moments from the golden age of Hollywood in a show called Hollywood Revisited. And that's the website too, HollywoodRevisited.com. You can check it out and see a little bit of my show on the website. Again, I owe it to Marilyn. And though I don't use Marilyn in the show because I feel like she's too important and valuable to take a chance with damage, I do use a dress that's a replica of the one she wore to the Kennedy birthday party, worn by Sarah LaFleur in the Women of Camelot. So at least I have Marilyn in my show.
Replica dresses are acceptable.
Okay, well, I'm not dishonest about it. I tell from the beginning. But I also tell the story about going to New York thinking I was going to get the birthday dress. And of course, I was a little bit short in cash to get it. But
yeah, you were at the Christie's auction and came home with nothing.
Yes, nothing. Since then, I've gotten things from the Christie's auction, but not during the Christie's auction.
Greg, you have another website aside from HollywoodRevisited.com. You have a Marilyn website that showcases your collection.
I do. And if anyone wants to check it out, you just go to www.themarilynmonroesite.com. And you can see my collection. And then, of course, you should share yours too, Scott, since we're complimentary.
MarilynMonroeCollection.com.
And you can see both of ours and see the fun things that we have, and hopefully will be on display at some point down the road.
Greg and I have a couple of opportunities that we're considering as far as exhibits at this point. We never talk about those until they're finalized and we've got something firm in place, but we do have several irons in the fire, so keep your fingers crossed.
Actually, even one more coming up, Scott, you don't know about yet.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear.
In the United States.
Yeah, we have some in the US now and then some other ones overseas. We will announce those when more information becomes available. Greg, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, I've had a ball. My favorite subject in the world.
Indeed. And we are the All Things Marilyn podcast, so it's perfect to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I am so honored.
We've really enjoyed it, and I've really wanted our listeners to get a chance to get to know more about you, and some of our newer listeners who may not have experienced you yet get to know really, as I said, the father of the Marilyn Monroe community. You've been around for so long, and
I feel so old.
It's not an
we
age
didn't say
thing.
Grandfather. We said
didn't
father.
It's
42
not an age
years.
thing.
Oh dear.
Yeah. It's really though just the amount of years that you've contributed to keeping Marilyn's memory alive, and not just that, but also putting the truth out there, being really careful to make sure that she's being represented accurately, appropriately, with dignity and grace, as per the Marilyn Remembered tagline, remembering Marilyn with dignity and grace. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having this, and thank all of you for supporting me in the club. I couldn't have done it without all of you.
It's our pleasure,
It's an
an honor.
Thank you, Greg, for coming on, and thank you for everything that you do. It's an honor having you here.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of the All Things Marilyn podcast. We appreciate you for listening. Don't forget that you can follow us on Instagram. Our account is at All Things Marilyn Podcast. You can listen to us anywhere where you listen to podcasts, and we hope that you'll leave us a good review. You can email us at allthingsmarylandpodcast@gmail.com if you have any feedback or suggestions or thoughts or ideas for future topics for an episode of our podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the All Things Marilyn podcast.
Good night, man.
Bye-bye.
You loved on the screen, and that's the one thing that survived, you know.
I realize more and more the responsibility, but you do miss sometimes, just
being able to be completely yourself and someplace and people just know you as another human being.